Hey there, it's Leslie at Leslie's Cookies and Treats, and in this cookie decorating tutorial, we're going to decorate 5 different snow hats for winter fun. The cookie cutter STL file is on my website, the link is in the bio, and all of the supplies are listed in the description. So grab your cookies and decorate along with me. We're going to start out with a wet on wet snow hat. So I'm going to outline and flood the hat in a green royal icing in about a 12-second consistency and use my scribe to smooth the icing out. And once my icing is smooth, I'm going to grab my white royal icing in the same consistency and put dots right into that wet green icing for a wet on wet effect. And I'll give it a little shake to settle those dots down, and then I put the cookie aside to dry. And now I'm coming back in with my white royal icing, and I'm just going to flood in the base of the hat here and then also the top, and use my scribe to settle that icing down and move it out to the corners. And we'll do the same thing for the ball at the top of the hat. And then I'm going to actually use some sprinkles and just use some sanding sugar and cover the bottom of the hat and the top of the hat with the sanding sugar. Again, all of the products are linked in the description. And then this little hat is done, and we're going to start in on our next hat. We'll also be using the wet on wet technique to decorate this hat. So go ahead and outline and flood in the hat in a blue royal icing. And my royal icing here is a bit too thick. You want to work with about a 12 to 15 second consistency. And you could even go a little bit looser if you wanted to for a wet on wet pattern. But if I work with this icing enough with my scribe, I can get it to settle down. However, to do wet on wet, I do need to work fairly quickly. So it really is in your best interest for a wet on wet effect if you stop and thin down your icing with a tad of water. And now that my icing is smooth, I'm just going to make lines immediately into the wet icing with my white royal icing. So touch down your icing, lift up and go across and touch down on the other side. And then I'm just going to drag these little bumps down where I started. Now I'm going to drag lines up and down through this wet icing in a kind of curved pattern following along both sides of the hat. And again, because my blue icing is stiffer, I am going to have to wiggle my icing a little bit to get it to settle down and also give it a good shake. And then I'll set this cookie aside to dry for about 15 minutes, and then I'm going to come back in with my white flood icing and outline and flood in the base and the top of the hat. I'm not going to flood all the way to the edges because this icing is a bit looser and I don't want it to overflow, so I'll use my scribe to get the icing out to the edges and up into the points of the corners, and just to smooth the icing out and pop any air bubbles. And I'll do the same thing for the top of the hat. And then I'm going to use my sanding sugar and put sprinkles on the top of the hat only. So very carefully, I'm just going to cover the top of the hat, and then I'll set this cookie aside to dry. Now this cookie would be really cute if you added a name to the base of the hat once it's dry. And now moving on to our next hat, go ahead and outline the hat area with a white royal icing, again at about a 12 to 15 second flood consistency, and use your scribe to settle it down just like we have for the first 2 cookies. If your royal icing is sticking to your scribe and it's leaving peaks, just wipe your scribe off on a damp paper towel and then just barely poke up and down into the icing until the peak settles down. Now taking the icing color of your choice, we're going to make stripes right into that wet white icing. So touch down, lift up, and then drag your piping bag across the white icing. Again, this is a wet on wet effect and it will dry as one solid surface. And once you finish making your stripes, you can take a dampened paintbrush and just gently knock down all of the ends that might be sticking out. And then grab your next color of icing and make stripes right in between the blue stripes. And you might want to wipe off the tip of your piping bag to get rid of any bumps of icing at the start of your lines should you need to. And once you're done making all of your stripes, go ahead and use your paintbrush to push down any bumps at the ends and then set this cookie aside to dry. And now that the cookie has had a chance to set up, go ahead and outline and flood in the base of the hat using your white royal icing. And as always, use your scribe to get the icing out to the edges and pop any air bubbles. And now for the top of this hat, I'm actually going to just give it a little swirl with stiffer icing with a size 16 star tip. My icing consistency is probably about a 30-second if you were going to try to count, just for a different texture on this hat. And moving on to our 4th hat, we're going to actually use an embossed parchment paper technique for this one. So go ahead and outline and flood in the cap. And you can smooth it out with your scribe, but you don't need to be too careful. And then I'm using a knit 2 pattern from Intricate Edibles that I cut myself just a little square because I didn't need a whole sheet. And I'm just going to press it down onto the icing. And then I'm going to actually set it upside down until it has dried completely, which takes about 24 hours where I live. And once it's dry, I'll just peel off the parchment paper, which you can reuse multiple times. And then I have this fancy sweater pattern on my hat. Simple and easy and super cute. And then I'm just using my stiff icing and my star tip size 16 to just make a textured rim on the bottom of this hat, and then also at the top. And then I wanted it to have even more texture, so I waited for it to dry just a little bit, and I'm just using my paintbrush in an up and down motion and kind of swirling it around to give it even more texture. And after it dried just a little bit, I added more icing and even did that again because I wanted it to be really fuzzy on the bottom and the top of this hat. So I just put a squiggle of icing, and then I'm just using my paintbrush to tap up and down and move it around in a bumpy pattern. And then I even took the end of my paintbrush and used an up and down motion because I wanted it to have a really bumpy textured look. So if you want to do this to your cookie, let your royal icing set up a little bit and then just poke up and down at it with your paintbrush. And then that cookie is done, and we're going to move on to our final cookie. And for this cookie, we're going to be piping a knit pattern, and I already flooded the cookie and let it dry. And now I'm using my detail consistency royal icing, which is about a 25 to 30 second consistency, and a tip sized 1.5, and I'm just making small little lines. So you want to touch down with your icing, lift up and go across, touch down, lift up, go across, apply even pressure on your piping bag as you're moving across with your line. If you lift up your piping bag as you're moving across, your lines will be much straighter than if you keep your piping tip on the cookie. So now let's start piping our knit pattern. I'm using the same 1.5 tip and the same icing, which is a detail consistency. And I'm just piping a ball and then dragging it to a point. Pipe a ball, stop squeezing, drag it to a point, and I'm just alternating sides, almost like making little hearts. Pipe a ball, drag it down, pipe a ball, drag it down, pipe a ball, drag it down. And you want to try to make your balls a uniform shape, but if you don't, you can use a dampened paintbrush and kind of just move it where you need to. So once again, pipe a ball, stop squeezing, drag it down, pipe a ball, stop squeezing, drag it down. And just continue until you've filled in all of the hat. And once you finish with all the knit, go ahead and let this cookie dry. It will take about 15 minutes or so, and then you can come back in and flood in the bottom of the cookie. I actually let mine dry completely, so I'm going to use some sanding sugar on the bottom and the top of this hat, but I honestly wish I had just piped it in like this and left it alone. And now all of our hat cookies are done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, leave me a note in the comments. And let me know what other kind of cookie tutorials you'd like to see. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy cookie decorating, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. I have new tutorials all the time. Bye.